Alright, good morning again. Diamond Sutra, part 2. So first off, the chanting, that was, I think that was about 15 minutes, something like that. As we go through the next sessions, I'll move some pieces in and out. I'll keep it in that 15-20 minute range. We've got 6 of these sessions altogether. For the 6th one, just fair warning, my intent is for the 6th one we'll do the whole thing. So it's like 35 minutes, something like that. I apologise for, I think I skipped a line in there at one point, and there are odd words I missed and odd words I repeated, so I apologise. I'm doing my best, but hopefully it's strong enough that it's meaningful to everybody. Alright, what we're going to do today is we're going to jump and talk about, I'll get rid of those two, and we're actually going to jump and talk about sections 16 and 17 in this. What I'm going to suggest you do is you can look at these with me as I'm talking about it. But we're going to do, I'm sorry, 17, 18 and 19, not 16 at all. And we're going to look at those alongside the first few, because there's some interesting parallels here, which is why I'm jumping ahead. I'm jumping ahead for the parallels and to really focus on mind. This is talking a lot about mind. This is the mind that does not dwell. What is this mind? So we're going to talk about mind, and I'm jumping ahead to do that. So first of all, just a little bit of the structure. The sections are all numbered. This is a historic numbering. It comes out of the time when, I think it's actually the original translation by Kumarajiva, but it's very old. There are 32 sections. 32 is a magical number. We chanted a couple of times in here, can the Buddha be recognized by his 32 body parts? Which is why, one of the reasons why Red Pine in his commentary says, it's about bodies. 32 is also half of 64, which is the number of gua there are in the I Ching. And the I Ching is a cornerstone of Chinese philosophy and spirituality. And this is very Chinese structure. It's originally Sanskrit, but what we have is very much a Chinese text. So there's kind of mysticism and magic in the 64, and when you go through the I Ching, 32 is very clearly the halfway mark, that you basically restart 33. So there's a restarting here at 17, marking the halfway mark. So what we get here, at that time, Subhuti, so we're reading 17 here, at that time Subhuti addressed the Buddha thus: World honoured one, when virtuous men and virtuous women initiate the mind of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, how should their minds dwell? How should their minds be pacified? If you've read this a few times, that will be very familiar. If we go back to section 2, the middle paragraph in section 2, most rare world honoured one, the Tathagata is skillfully mindful, perfectly instructing and interesting the bodhisattvas. World honoured one, when virtuous men and virtuous women initiate the mind of Anuttara, etc. It's the same. It's exactly the same question. So Buddha was just expounding the answer to this, and Subhuti comes back and asks the same question. So there's something going on here. There's a lot of repetition in this sutra. The same questions come up again and again and again. He talks about the paramitas, talks about the mind not dwelling, talks about pacifying the mind, talks about charity, lots of different lenses on this. It's not repetitive for the sake of being repetitive. It's repetitive because this is so subtle, and looking at it in different ways exposes, allows us to get closer to seeing the truth here. So the first time Buddha answered, he said, excellent, excellent. Those who wish to initiate the mind of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi should thus dwell and pacify their minds. He'd just been out, begged for food, come back, eaten his food, washed his feet, folded his robes and sat. Right? He'd just lived his life, lived ordinary life. But he'd done it in samadhi. This is the answer. Subhuti missed it. So the Buddha then goes on and starts to answer it. So in section 3, he says, all bodhisattvas excuse me, no he doesn't, he says they should call their minds this way, and then he says all kinds of being through my reaching nirvana are saved. That was the answer. And why is this? Any bodhisattva who retains the notion of an ego, a personality, a being, and a life is not a true bodhisattva. This time he doesn't say that at all. This time he says, where are we? Have I copied something wrong here? Oh yeah, here we go. Virtuous men and virtuous women who seek Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi must develop a mind. What on earth? But we just said there is no mind, right? What's going on here? Must develop a mind to liberate all sentient beings. So the mind that is being developed here is exclusively the resolve to awaken all beings. It's the resolve to offer the gift of freedom. There's the three levels of gift: the gift of material goods, gift of the Dharma, and the gift of freedom, liberation, nirvana. So it is the resolve to offer the gift of freedom, and we'll talk about charity later, and this is really what that charity is about. It's this generosity of the gift of liberation. So develop the mind, yet when, and this is the repetitious bit, when all sentient beings have been liberated, not a single being has been liberated. So the mind that we're talking about, it neither exists nor doesn't exist. You can't say it exists and you can't say it doesn't exist. You develop it, but in reality, what is it we're developing? There's nothing to develop. There's nothing to develop. So the illogical structure, the illogical sentence structure, the illogical logic of this is because language can't do this. This is so much of this really is about the inadequacy of language, and things come into being when we name them. There's in Western cultures, my name's Gareth. There is an ancient Gaelic name, Gareth, and it has a particular meaning. But when I was called Gareth, it just, my parents thought it was an interesting name. It actually came out of Le Morte d'Arthur, stories of King Arthur. My sisters were christened Catherine, Margaret, and Gillian because they're flexible names. Catherine can become Kate, Katie. You could Kitty. You can do lots of things. Margaret is Meg, Peggy. There's lots of things you can do with these names. If you grow up in, let's just go to the Middle East. You grow up in a Muslim country in the Middle East, and you will be named. So Nur is. I've got a friend called Nur. That means light. And there's an attribute in there. There's an aspiration in there. It's you've created something. My name is just, it's an abstract label for an object, but I'm going to these other ways of naming because those names create an intention. There's a very clear intention. I've got a very good friend, Kamal Abi. Many of you met him here when he came down for my installation, for the Sangha's installation of me. Kamal means perfection, something like that. So again, there's an intention, there's an aspiration that is created in this naming. When we name things, they come into being. When we name mind, mind comes into being. When we name bodhisattva, bodhisattva comes into being. So a lot of this is this language game, right? So we develop this mind. Calling it a mind is kind of missing the point, but there's an intention, there's an aspiration to liberate all beings that is nurtured, that is cultivated. But we acknowledge that there's actually nobody to be saved. We've labelled, we've identified all these sentient beings, but there really aren't discrete sentient beings. It's because we go through this act of labelling and identifying and naming and how we construct the world in which we live that we create these things. So we create our own suffering. So this is an exercise in kind of undoing all of that construction. So to undo it, we've got to create this intention, and that intention results in this undoing of everything. And again, it's not to say there's nothing there. It's just not what we think it is. So this is because in actuality there is no dharma called attaining anuttara samyak sambodhi. We are already awake. We've just created all these stories and laid them on top of it. And the dharma, anuttara samyak sambodhi, it's elsewhere in here we see supreme enlightenment. Anuttara samyak sambodhi often is not translated, but it means supreme perfect enlightenment. That's what it's pointing at. It's pointing at the it's pointing at the dissolution of self, and the emergence is the wrong word, but it's pointing at Tathagata or at Dharmakaya. Tathagata is thus come, thus gone one, which is a beautiful epithet. It's the epithet the Buddha used for himself, which is, there isn't anybody here. This is thus come, it's thus gone. It's not creating an existence, but it's not denying an existence. It's this mind, this intent to liberate. So there is no dharma, there is no teaching, there is no thing, there is no construction, which actually is attaining this awakening. There's not some magical act that happens where you wave a wand and something changes. And intellectually that is, intellectually that's hard to follow. Logically, it's impossible to follow because it's not logical. It's beyond logic. And that's why intellectually it's so hard to follow, because our minds are trained to work so intellectually. But this is pointing at the awakened state. State is not quite right either. The awakened, you can't do it in words. Essence is also wrong, because these all land on either existence or non-existence. Language will always land us on either existence or non-existence. And what we're pointing at here is precisely that which neither exists nor does not exist, nor both exists and does not exist, nor neither exists or does not exist. You can't land on it. You can move, you can release and realize that. Realizing is the word that's used a lot in the Sanatana Dharma, self-realized. And I think that's the best approach I've found to this. The self-realization, which is allowing the self, the true self, to realize itself. That's what this is really pointing at. There is no dharma called this. There is just settling, and this is what happens. So Dipankara Buddha, who we're going to talk about, is the Buddha of the past. In many Asian cultures there are three Buddhas: the Buddha of the past, the Buddha of the present, and the Buddha of the future. I was just in Vietnam. I will talk more about that tomorrow, Sunday. Many of the altars there are three Buddhas: Dipankara Buddha of the past, Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha as he's called, and Maitreya Buddha, who's the Buddha of the future. So Dipankara was this Buddha of the past, this mythical Buddha, with whom Shakyamuni many eons ago as a bodhisattva trained. And the gist of this large chunk in here, which shows up in other ways throughout this sutra, the gist of this is, actually it shows up earlier in something we talked about earlier, which is, we didn't talk about it. Subhuti earlier in the sutra is talking about the four levels of stream entry. This is the Sakradagamin, Anagamin, and the Arhat is the fourth one. And Subhuti says that had I said I'm an Arhat, had I claimed any attribute of being an Arhat, the world honour would not have called me an Arhat. It's precisely because I don't claim that he can say I am the foremost among the Arhats. And the same kind of thing is going on here, where the Buddha is not identifying and is precisely denying the existence of dharmas that will cause him to awaken, that allows Dipankara Buddha to identify him as one who will. Because the most difficult thing is you let go of self and then you hold on to this emptiness, you hold on to this enlightenment. You've missed it if you do. That's the... now listen well to what I say. Those who wish to initiate the mind of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi should thus dwell and pacify their minds. One of my favourite renditions of this is the teacher who asks a student a question, difficult question. The student settles into some kind of samadhi and then opens their mouth to answer, and as the student opens their mouth, the teacher puts forward the hand. It's in that space, it's neither existent nor not existent. The thought is starting to crystallize, the words are starting to crystallize, but they don't crystallize. It's neither, there's something there, but there's not. It's a beautiful way of holding this liminal space. And then we have the last couple of chunks of this section are really they're exploring and expanding on this. It is not, but it is merely called so. So let's look at the last one, which is the majestic Buddha lands. If a bodhisattva says, I make the Buddha lands majestic, that person is not a bodhisattva. Well, I, to start with, if I do anything, I am not a bodhisattva, because I don't exist. I'm not going to identify myself as a discrete being. I don't do anything, because I am just this accumulation of stuff. There's nothing, there's no heart there, there's no real me there. But I call it a me precisely because that's what it is. So I make the Buddha lands. Buddha lands, what are Buddha lands? Buddha lands are, there's a mythical element to Buddha lands, which are these sort of separate places in the universe which are created for people, for us to go to, jump onto the path to awakening, not regress, and stay there and be reborn there until we wake up. That's a Buddha land. But to see them as these separate lands is to miss what they really are, because realities don't exist separately from each other. The Buddha land is in your heart, really. The Buddha land is the ability to purify, to let go, to relinquish, to wake up, that is implicit within our very hearts. So we don't have to go to other planets to do this. So there's no making of Buddha lands. They're already there. And this and it doesn't say it here, but a lot of the times it will, or does it? Yeah, it does. The majestic Buddha lands spoken of by the Buddha are not majestic. There is no such thing as majestic. Everything's majestic and nothing's majestic. And there's nothing to be majestic. And yet, to say there's nothing is wrong because there is something. So the language misses it because language is objectifying that which is beyond objectification, creating subject and object. Language is also, and I don't know how to do this linguistically, but language is also, objectifying is something that happens in space, right? We create subjects and objects in space.
So language is doing this within space. It's creating subjects and objects in space with things that are not actually discrete from each other.
They're making concrete.
Yeah. And the other thing it's doing, language is doing, is it's separating things in time. It's creating events. It's creating verbs. But time is every bit as much of a mental construction that we build in order to throw our events around in, and our actions, as spaces for us to put objects in. So language does this. Language creates these things. Language gives us a way of seeing that creates these. And by saying they are not this, is acknowledging the limitation of that language and the limitation of that perspective. The fundamental error of that perspective due to the limitation of the language. And yet it then comes back to say, but are merely called majestic. In order for us to function, we need to have something. So we do call them majestic. So they are merely called majestic. The practice really that this is pointing at, there are the two sides of our practice. In the first one, Buddha is skillfully mindful. Mindful, and this is not strictly right, but it's close enough and it points at an important truth which it's getting at. The mindful piece of it is that which allows us to see clearly, that which allows us to see through things, that which allows us to see the falsehood of these verbal constructions, the falsehood of these objects and these events, that they aren't really things. The skillfully is recognizing the world is full of beings. They're beings because they think they're beings. They're not really beings, but each of us is a being in that we think we are beings. And because we think we're beings, we are causing ourselves and causing other beings that think they're beings enormous suffering. Because to land in this thing that's separate can do nothing but cause suffering. So the skillfully piece, the mindful piece, is what's allowing a bodhisattva to recognize the reality of this fundamental error. And the skillful piece is what's allowing them to move in the world, allowing them to show up first, to manifest, and to move in the world in a way that relieves suffering, in a way that helps these beings realize that thinking they are beings is an error. So that's what's going. We've got both of these going on, and this is why it's the complexity of this is it's trying really, really, really hard to keep us from landing on one of those separate from the other. It's trying to keep us with both of those together, seeing really clearly that there is nothing there, and yet there's all of this suffering that we need to act with great charity to relieve. Okay, move on to section 18. We've got this section here where, Subhuti, what do you think? Does the Tathagata have physical eyes, Deva eyes, wisdom eyes, Dharma eyes, Buddha eyes? Yes. So these eyes, I'm sure there are several different schools of Buddhism that each have their own particular view of what these are. At one level, some, within this continuum, some of the data points are fairly straightforward, but the important thing is there is a continuum here. And I'm going to just step through the continuum, and I'll land on the particular things that Hui En, as he uses them, I'll sort of, but I won't do it perfectly well. But do we have human eyes? Yes. Physical eyes. Yes, we do. We see each other. Or we acknowledge Clay has limitations on how his eyes work. But the eyes we're talking about here are not just our physical eyes. Vision is such a dominant sense in most humans that we use eyes, we use vision, and we use our vision as the sense and eyes as the sense organ to basically describe experiencing the world. So somebody says something to you and you suddenly understand. You say, oh, I see. And if somebody's not following you, you say, look, there's so many of these references for just understanding, awareness of the world that point at vision, point at eyes. So eye here is being used in that broader sense as well. So physical eyes are just experiencing the world in a very ordinary way. Deva eyes, I don't have Deva eyes, so I have no idea how this works. But what is described is the ability to see all worlds everywhere. The ability to see Alan's heartbeat, to see how Natalie's mind is actually working right now, to see what the people in the condo underneath Sally are doing right now, to just sit. It's this extraordinary vision. Buddhas have this vision, and Devas have this vision, right? There's an intermediate thing in here, which is we have subtle senses, we have subtle instinct. Instinct is a very powerful thing, and instinct is something that we culturally don't respect very much, but it's very real. Intuitively, from time to time, I'll just realise I need to call Beth. I know something's going on, I need to talk to her. That's the person I'm closest to. But that will happen with other people too. In Vietnam, I was with a guy who was a Vietnam vet, and he said when he was, this is something that just landed on him when he went out into the field and stuff. He got this instinct that told him when it was not safe to go somewhere. And had this not shown up, he would have died half a dozen, or more than that. He told me a number of stories of where that instinct just stopped him in his tracks, and other people had gone forward and been shot where he had stopped. And he sees people who will shortly die, he sees as shadows. He knows. And so I just can't talk to him sometimes because he knows what's going on. So this is one flavour. We can. There are lots of ways that we can open up to these more subtle senses. So that's all within this realm. Wisdom eyes. As our wisdom grows, we start to see the non-essence, the emptiness, the interbeing nature of everything, and it just. So this is in the beginning, a mountain is a mountain, and then as we practice, a mountain ceases to be a mountain, and then as we continue to practice, once again a mountain is a mountain, only it's not the same mountain. That second mountain walks. That second mountain talks. That second mountain is the size of a pin and the size of a universe, size of a pinprick and the size of a universe. All at once. I mean, it's just not the same. There's a level of, and that second mountain, it's alive. So there's this vision shifts to see just naturally things as empty, see things naturally as in this very open way. The Dharma eye and the Buddha eye. The Dharma eye is to be in a place of equanimity with everything. So you see everything and you make no distinctions at all, no judgments at all of anything at all. And that matures into compassion. And Huyen talks about compassion in a way, this is now the Buddha eye, you see everything with equanimity and with profound compassion. Huyen does something with compassion that I really like, which this is going to, I'm confident this comes out of the Chinese yin-yang approach to everything, which is he has a masculine and a feminine side of compassion. The masculine side is benevolence, it's very active, and the feminine side is I think of the word he uses. But it's a receptive side of compassion. It's just the open heart. It's not active. It's just feeling feeling love, feeling compassion, feeling sympathy. He distinguishes between those two sides of compassion. So that's the eyes, right? And it's looks like non sequitur in here, just kind of thrown in here. But the reason it's in here is because it is pointing to how important it is, in order to really understand this sutra, to be cultivating this deeper and deeper way of seeing the world. Our practice naturally takes us down a path of seeing more and more clearly. Starts to open up intuition. We just start to see more deeply. And it's only when we start to really see more deeply that this illogic starts to really make just intuitive sense, and it is the way the world is. And we start to realize this is just the way the world is. So that's what this thing on vision is. And then we get into the next piece. If there are as many Ganges rivers as there are grains of sand in the Ganges, would that be a lot? Sure, it's a ton. And of course, with these various different visions, the Buddha can see all of these and see all the beings on all of these worlds. And he then goes on to say, the living beings in the multitudes of land have different kinds of minds which are known to the Tathagata. So we've been talking about, this is the mind piece, right? Different kinds of minds. What are all these different kinds of minds? That which, it says, why is this? Not what is this, but why is this? That which the Tathagata calls mind is not really mind, but is merely called such. So this is the heart of where I wanted to get to today. This and then the next sentence. What we've just talked about applies to mind. There's an infinite probably not, there's a vast array of different kinds of mind. Even within this physical form, there are so many different kinds of mind. There's lots of different kinds of intuition functioning separately. There's no I read a book years ago by a philosopher of mind called Daniel Dennett, in which he concludes the mind doesn't exist, which it's like I think therefore I am. Well, I think therefore I am not, right? It's the same thing. But one of the core statements is a really deep analysis of how the mind works, and he says there is no theatre of the mind. Meaning we've got all these different modules up here that all work in different ways, all different kinds of minds. They don't ever actually come together. There's no CPU. There's no central thing that is a me that is pulling all the strings. There are all these different minds. And there are minds in the body as well. There's increasing evidence, scientific evidence, that cells, individual cells, carry individual consciousness, individual volition within our body. We can tune into this, and as you said, we can tune into different levels. There's another line in here which is all the sages differ only in their realization of this. I didn't quote that right, but there's different levels of understanding. All sages, all traditions, they differ only in their levels of understanding. So our practice is allowing us to move into realizing all of these different minds, even within here. How much more so if you look at all of life across the entire universe? And yet, what the Tathagata calls mind is not really the mind. There is no mind. What is it?
It's a mystery. It's a mystery. We start labeling this thing, we start identifying with it, it then becomes that which pulls us away from knowing who and what we really are. So we have to do something with it. We call it a mind. This is why we call it a mind. And in that sense it is a mind, but thinking it's a thing is a mistake that causes suffering. Being as such, Subhuti, the past mind is ungraspable, the present mind is ungraspable, the future mind is ungraspable. And again, this is not to say there is no mind. It's not to say there is no mind. I hesitated there because I was hesitating on whether to use the word mind, but I'm going to use it. It's not to say there isn't one, but it is to say that it is only a mind as an expedient method. It is only a mind as a practical matter for us to be able to talk about it. There's a famous story, Bodhidharma, who is the person who took mythologically the Dharma from India to China. Tai Chi and Shaolin Temple, notionally and historically, maybe mythically, arose from his arrival in China. One of his disciples, one of the people who was to become one of his disciples, visited him and said, Master, I can't pacify my mind. It's exactly what we're talking about here. Right? I can't pacify my mind. How can I pacify my mind? Bodhidharma said to him, show me your mind and I will pacify it. So Hoike, which is what his name, Hoike went away. And he came back sometime later and said, Master, I can't find my mind. Bodhidharma said, here you go, I pacified it for you. He didn't pacify anything, right? But it's you can't find your mind. Buddha said, and this is the anatman, no self, no soul. One of Buddha's statements there was, I sat there for many, many years looking for self, and I couldn't find it. Hoike went away to find his mind so somebody could pacify it for him. He couldn't find his mind. It's ungraspable. And when we recognize it's ungraspable, that itself is pacifying the mind. When we recognize it's ungraspable, and we just let it go. Stop labeling it, stop trying to hold it. Stop trying to pretend it's a thing. There's a word that shows up that I meant to talk about in some of this today, which is the Tathagata and the Dharma is such, is as such. Such is a word that shows up a lot in much of Mahayana teaching. And suchness is another way of describing this. It's just as it is. Just so shows up here. Just so. As such. We can't do anything with it. We can't understand it. We can't explore it. We can't examine it. It is just so. It is as such. Suchness is something that a poem, and I can only remember 2 lines out of the middle of it, but the poem, the 2 lines are, it is now me, I am not it. Which is a mind bender, but that's a way of describing suchness. It is now me, the whole universe stepping forward, alive, vibrant, but totally fluid, effervescent, evanescent. A dream, an illusion, a bubble and a shadow, like a dewdrop and a flash of lightning. I am not it.
There's no I. There's a story, one of the Coens in the, I think this one's in the Blue Cliff Record. There's a scholar of the Diamond Sutra who has written many treatises and many notes on it, and he's walking around teaching about the Diamond Sutra. He's got a big rucksack on his back full of all of his scrolls, and he's going to go to that temple over there up the hill to lecture the folks up there. And he stops at a little stall, and there's a little old lady behind the stall selling food, selling dim sum. It's breakfast, right? And the Chinese language, I don't know Chinese, but I know enough about Chinese to know that this is kind of structurally how it works. So you get the different kanji that mean different things. So you've got different symbols that are actually pictograms, and you put them together and they make a word. So the way you would structure breakfast, the word for breakfast, has symbols that mean that include a symbol for mind, feeding the mind. It's feeding the mind. So this person asked the lady behind the stall for breakfast, and the characters buried underneath that he wasn't using for this reason. They meant feeding the mind. And she said, "Which mind do you want to feed? The past mind is not graspable. The present mind is not graspable. The future mind is not graspable." I didn't know what to do. So she, just that circumstance that allowed her to catch him with these words made him realize that there's no way of holding on to anything. This thing we think of as a mind that we hold so closely and we identify with is a fundamental error. He burned all of his scrolls. Alright, that's enough of me talking. Let us now. So, what does that bring up for you folks? Thoughts, questions, comments? I think you're saying something, Charles, but you're on mute. Bottom left. There should be a microphone with a red line through it. Bottom left. Or you could just yell and Charlotte will come and do it for you.
Spacebar can.
Oh, spacebar. Alan just said. Spacebar does it?
Yeah.
Just hit spacebar.
No.
Apparently not. All right. Well, Charles is trying to figure it out. Anybody else? Clay.
When you were talking about how each cell in our body, we're beginning to discover that there's something there, right?
Mm-hmm.
The last time we met and did this, I went to work, and one of my clients is interested in this stuff, and she was asking about what we were studying, and you mentioned the koan about which do you hit, the horse or the cart?
Yeah.
And I was trying to explain the whole idea of you hit the body, and she kept going to no it's it's the mind, because your brain controls everything, and I'm like, your brain is a body part.
Yeah.
And additionally, if you want to get down to what motivates things, right? There's more certain.
So when I get a chance to
Hey Charles, hang on just a sec. Let Clay talk.
Yeah,
You
yes.
got your mic, yeah.
Yeah. There's more serotonin receptors in your stomach than there is in your head. So you could make the argument that your stomach is running the show. The stomach has created the brain simply as a complex mechanism to feed itself.
Yeah.
So if you're, it's hanging your identity on one thing it's arbitrary.
Yes.
It's something that we cling to desperately because we can't stand the thought of floating through ambiguity.
Right. That's right. And yes, and that is compounded because we feel this sense of self. We feel that there is an identity. We feel there is an ego, a personality, a being, and a self. We feel there's something there, and so it's got to land on something. We've got to let go of that very idea of there being a me in here. Only when we let go of that idea of there being a me can we let go of the idea of it having to land on something. Charles, we got you now.
Yes. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Good. So I guess what I was going to say when you first asked, is there anything that we would like to say or question? I guess the first thing that came to my mind was, so what's the point?
So do you want to keep going, or do you want me to just answer that?
Well, hey, there's got to be a point to it, but
yeah, I've got an answer for you.
Okay, go ahead.
The Buddha says, I taught two things. I teach two things. I teach suffering and the end of suffering. That's the point.
That's the point.
The point is we can. There's this philosophical stuff about emptiness, and we can be emptiness, and we can wake up to our true nature, and that all sounds great. But what it's really about is, I could pay attention to what's going here right now, and I can notice my legs are hurting, and I'm suffering. Or I can relate to this whole space in a completely different way and just feel the breathtaking wonder, the absolutely breathtaking wonder of these beautiful people who are here in the space and here on the computer, the vibrancy of life, the joy, and at the same time tune into the suffering that is around me and be totally open to that suffering and with that suffering and helping other people in their suffering. That is the point. It's the end of suffering. And the end of suffering isn't focused on the negativity of suffering, it's focused on the wonder and the beauty and the bliss and the joy of that release, the freedom that comes with it. The point is total freedom.
I see.
Sally.
I see why we're chanting. I think that's just the second session. I just feel like it's so important to chant this.
Yes.
And I think because is the sutra says, and as you were saying, and we were also, it is something we use language. We have to use the language, but it's beyond language. It has to be experienced in the body, the mind in the body, and that comes about through the chanting. But especially, so my question is kind of a practical one, especially when you mentioned that at the end we're going to chant the whole thing. I'm feeling like, even with all the breath work I've done with yoga and stuff, I'm feeling like I need a voice coach to help me with the breathing.
Mm-hmm.
By the end, I'm just getting out of breath, and I just wonder, or maybe somebody else here, maybe Clay or somebody, are there any practical tips just to the breath, to the breathing throughout the sutra? I'm forgetting to breathe basically, and then I'm like like that.
Yeah. So I'll give you my answer to that, but it's a great question, and I certainly would love to hear anybody else who's got other experiences. My own experience of chanting is what we're doing right now is
I'll come back to the way we're chanting right now because there's a difference to what we're doing here. When on a Sunday morning we got the Heart Sutra, we got a room full of people. They're like 15 people chanting. And when you've got 15 voices, any two people could stop at any time and you won't notice. So if that's what's going on, you can just chant naturally and breathe naturally and miss a few words.
Mm-hmm.
And if you notice when I'm chanting, I will miss 2 or 3 words while I'm going through an in-breath. So my breathing is much more natural. It's not like you breathe and then you suddenly gasp in the gap between words and then try and start chanting again. Just chant, and when the breath runs out, it doesn't matter where it is, it can be in the middle of a word. Just stop chanting, breathe in naturally and slowly to fill your lungs up, and then just start chanting again. So when you've got a group chanting session, you've got enough voices, that's what I would recommend is what everybody should do. And if everybody does that, everything balances out. You'll also notice when we do the Bodhisattva vows at the end, beings are numberless, I vow to save them, etc. I will keep my note going over the end and into the next line. Because that's not my break. My break is when my breath has run out, and in the middle of a line, wherever it is, I'll stop chanting. I'll stop the exhalation and I'll inhale. And then I'll start exhaling again and chanting while I'm exhaling until it's the time to breathe in again. So that's when you've got a large group, just 2 seconds play. The thing that makes it a little more awkward with what we're doing here is the tempo is different. So I'm running it at a much faster pace, and you've got one voice, which is me, because we don't have a group of people who's familiar with this, so we're not really all chanting it together. You've got me chanting and making mistakes, and you're trying to do your best individually to chant along. So it becomes more difficult. But I'd suggest you try and map what I just said as well as you can into that, and don't feel you have to chant every word. Recognize it's group chanting and other people are carrying the chant when you're not there. So that's my thought. Clay had something, and then Dick after Clay.
I think Sally mentioned my name when she asked her question.
She did.
Okay. Well, I can't chant with everybody else, so I just hum. You know, like I do the bumblebee breath with the pranayama. But my experience with the harmonica, you know, to sustain an outward kind of projection longer, you can't breathe through your nose. So I block off that because we vent air through our nose and our mouth when we talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
If you cut that passage off while you chant, like I'm not using my nose right now, you can,
that's
you can do it
interesting.
longer because you don't vent as much breath. It's more efficient.
That's an interesting tip. Dick.
When I was a member of a marching band, I realized that not all the trumpeters played all the time. That, I guess because of the nature of the instrument and we were amateurs, some of them would stop and take a breath and rest. Apparently it's a difficult instrument to play continuously. But even though that happened, among members of the band and among members of the audience, it wasn't noticed. And so the effect was pretty much the same, whether they were all playing at the same time or if they were not all playing at the same time. So I don't know, it sounds to me that's similar to what you're talking about, that the effect happens even if we don't all say every word all the time.
Does that help, Sally? Kaylee?
My problem was I could only really hear the wooden fish.
Oh, really?
And I don't know if that's I feel like that isn't a problem in Sunday meditation or chanting. Maybe because there are more people. I can hear more voices, but I don't know that I lost my place at one point and then I couldn't find it again. And then all I could hear was the wooden fish, and it was actually overwhelming for me in the middle of it. So I don't know if anybody else had that experience.
Pat?
Yeah, I tried to turn the sound off. I have a certain brain that the way it functions, too much sensory input, I will override things, and that I found the Motok to be irritating and distracting. I ended up taking off my headset so I could sort of hear it in the back, the rhythm in the background, but I ended up reading the words out loud on my own and not trying to chant, but just reading out loud. The way my brain worked, I got the depth and the color of the language better than by chanting. Now, chanting is beautiful to listen to. It is, there's there's many chants and many traditions, but maybe if I knew the text, then chanting it for memory would help. And since this all came from a culture with an oral tradition, I mean, chanting, reciting out loud, I mean, that was how teaching was done.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't work for me well. So that's the only point that I'm trying to say in all of this.
Thank you. Charles, you had something? Charles, did you have something?
No.
Okay. So a question for those people on Zoom. Kaylee said that she heard the mock talk but not the words. Was that? I want to figure out whether that was me or whether that was Kaylee. Sally.
I had that experience last time where toward the end, I think, as your voice toward the end of the chant was getting lower, or not, you weren't as loud toward the end. Okay. So the mock talk kind of took over. But when I didn't use headphones last time, and this time I used these things, and I didn't have any problem hearing your voice the whole way through and the mock talk. But the mock talk didn't take over like it did without headphones. So maybe that could help.
Well, what I will try and do next time is it's a different mock talk. I mean, this is what we normally use on a Sunday, and it sounds like this. And this time I use this, which sounds like this, which is higher pitched and louder, right? So maybe I'll use this next time. Oops, this. Maybe I'll just do that.
Yeah, I think that one sounds better, Gareth. To me on Zoom, that one sounds, it's there, but it's not as bright.
It's not as bright, which, part of the reason I like this, the one I used, is because it's much crisper. But I get it. That's what we'll do next time. Thank you all. Thank you all. What else comes out of this, Anand?
I think this is deep, right? For me, this gives me another lens, like any other sutras, right? Like Heart Sutra or so. And I think the point is the same, right? I think as Charles asked, what's the point?
Yes. So it's the right question.
Yeah, is the point. But I think in some cases we talked about landing, right? So landing, or I think here dwelling.
Yes.
There is a lot of other things. It's I don't know if it is I'm getting into a rabbit hole, but I just want to see that my understanding. So the Tathagata helped me better in this Diamond Sutra to me in few places, like it's only coming and going, right? So with the whole, I think the chanting and also this whole text, able to see that a little more clearly, the Tathagata, what he means Tathagata,
Yes.
than before when I other references, but this one helped. So it is about the suchness,
Yes,
basically.
absolutely.
Suchness. So when you talk about suchness, what how I'm understanding is any word you can use in any way. Basically, yeah, if there is a mind, yes, depending on how you see it, right? So if there is no mind, yes, there is no mind. So for these things they said like 3 times, right? If it is there, so what is that? Yeah, so that basically it is basically it merely called so, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
anything that all the naming, all the language, it is just the third part. It is because merely called so.
Yes, it is just merely called so.
Also, that's what how I'm understanding. But in that context, yes. So
Yes, that's right.
everything is yes, but the suchness context, nothing exists. Basically, suchness exists, but it is not.
It is neither real nor illusory. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. It doesn't not exist, but it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it exists in a. It's maybe I don't know how to put that, but it if you concretize it, it
That's right.
exists. But if you don't concretize it, if you don't objectify, it won't exist. I don't know if that is.
But
It appears. It's kind of to me. It's all there is just awareness, right? There is nothing
yeah,
else really. It's
That's
all
right.
in the mind, basically.
that's right.
That's how I'm saying.
So, and the mind is not this mind. It's this
Yeah,
mind. Right?
yeah. I'm not talking like physically the mind, but
Yeah.
actual that phenomena itself, right? The
But
awareness.
it's understanding what mind is, because mind isn't this little thing here. Mind is
Right.
something far bigger and at the same time tiny.
Yeah.
The where I was hesitating on is I agree with everything you're saying, absolutely. The caution is that it's really easy when saying if we don't name it, we don't do things with it, it doesn't exist, to land on nihilism, to say there is nothing, and that's as profound an error as making the things happen. You know, that's why this is so slippery, because it's that
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
it's that liminal space in the middle. Dick. Oh yeah, go ahead, Dick. Dick.
During your talk, I at some point wrote down a note to myself. I am not going to say anything because if I say something, I'm going to have to use language, and if I use language, I can be undercut.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting. But frankly, you help clarify. I mean, obviously, we're dealing with a mystery here
Yeah.
that we can't grasp. And I once saw a definition of theology is that which at least defines what the mystery actually is. And so this has been helpful.
I'm going to play with your words just a little bit, Dick, because and this is playful. It's only playful. You said I'm not going to say anything, because to say anything I'd have to use words, and if I use words, I could be undercut. I could be undercut. Everything was great up to that point, sir. Natalie.
It was interesting to hear the perspectives about language, And I think that this sutra to me goes beyond language.
Yeah.
For example, it goes into concept, not just language. For example, there is a tribe in the Amazon called the Pirahã Indians, and that tribe doesn't have a lot of language that we have. For example, they don't have language for numbers. They don't count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, they do have the concept of quantity. So, for example, they have like a no quantity, small quantity, and big quantity.
Yeah.
So it's not like numbers. They don't have language for numbers, but there is still a concept for that. And so this goes beyond just language and, okay, we have the so-called dharma. There is no dharma, but there is the so-called dharma. But I think the point here is that not just the word about dharma, but the whole concept. It's almost like you perceive the environment inside the organism and outside the organism without putting any concepts on it.
Yes.
And in that perspective, nothing could be majestic just because that concept of majesty just doesn't exist. And we can think about, I think one time you gave an example, some imaginary word. You know, what about like that particular quality? You know, how do you perceive it? How do you feel about it? Well, you don't feel anything about it because it's not a concept, right?
Yeah.
And so here, it's not just about concepts that don't exist, but about like all the concepts that we, in order for us to engage with the environment, we tend to find some concepts helpful, and these concepts, engaging with them, can sustain the life of the organism, and that's why we continue using them. Some of them, you know, can be detrimental, but there we go. We don't, we don't just have that mechanism where we distinguish in what situation that concept would be detrimental, and like thinking of the eye, perceiving the eye would be detrimental, and in what particular situations it actually might be helpful. You know, sometimes it could be helpful. And so here is like, you can't just like you let go of it all, but at the same time it is helpful.
That's right.
It is helpful to live in like this physical environment, and so you can't just like you have to still be using these concepts in order to communicate, in order to sustain your life, of the life of the organism. And so I think it just goes beyond that. And in terms of the gut feelings, so biologists, there's really not just biologists but neurobiologists who have argued that through evolution things have developed around visceral organs, and the visceral organs in some organisms millions of years ago, they were the whole organism. And so from that organism, little by little, as they become more complicated, more is necessary, and that's how the function of consciousness has arisen. The different levels of consciousness has arisen, but the visceral organs have an extremely important part of within consciousness. Consciousness, like you said, we can't find the mind here or everywhere. Well, the consciousness, or maybe thinking of the mind as consciousness, it involves not just the brain and the nervous system, but also the visceral organs, because they have generated, they basically generate benefit for the organism through generating feelings. And these feelings are the gut instincts, basically. They come from there because these visceral organs, they function in a particular way, and then they create stimuli for the rest of the organism to basically sustain the best, the homeostasis or the best, I guess, being or state of that organism to sustain life. So yeah, I mean, not just like the gut, but all the visceral organs are part of that mechanism of creating consciousness.
You had something on
Yeah, when you're talking about, I'm not going to neurobiology, but something came up, also something of you said, there are, this world is, we created this world, so we need to, move in the world with the language of the world, right? So we have to, but I think not being attached to it and doing it without getting attached to it, that is
That's it.
what I think more subtle, right? So it is maybe, I don't know, it's a practice, or it is the way you see, or it is awareness, or
yes to all of those.
yeah. So that's what we always struggle with this practice, right? So I mean, struggle in the sense, that's what we try to crack, I would say, to me, because all of these takes very close to that, but we have to use this language, we have to create I, we have to create all of that. At the same time, we need to be aware of that I is not really the I.
And therefore, but it's merely called I.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Clay.
I think both of my friends here are getting onto something good, because we have to use language, but we shouldn't to operate in the world, but we shouldn't mistake the language for the world. It's essentially the point.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to see what we really are, which is not what we usually think we are, and then the operating in the world is purely for the purpose of relieving suffering. It's not for getting a nice house or getting a nice car, or for enjoying the movie I'm going to go see tonight. I'm going to go see Dune in IMAX tonight. So that's not what it's about. It's about relieving suffering. It's the only reason we're here to function in the world, if we're doing it right. Because if we're not doing it right, we're causing suffering. It is noon, folks. That is the advertised end time. If anybody has anything compelling that they really want to say before we finish, please do. Otherwise, we will finish. I will pause to see if anybody has anything compelling, and then we'll wrap up. Clay has something compelling.
So if you're giving us the gift of Dharma, and the Dharma isn't real, does that mean that you just didn't give us anything? Right?
Correct.
All right, thank you for nothing.
All right, folks. Have a wonderful weekend. Hope to see many of you tomorrow. Everybody, take care.